Welcome to the first video of chapter 2 of our Introduction to Java book series. This video is an accompanying video to the book that we have written on Introduction to Java. And in this particular video, we'll be focusing on understanding variables in Java, basically. So without further ado, let's start focusing on variables in Java. So if you look at the first thing we need to understand what are variables in Java, right? So if you need to remember, in Java, variable is a container that holds data. Think of it like a labeled storage box. You give it a name and store information inside it, which can be numbered, text, or even complex objects. As you can see on the screen below, we have two variables defined here, an integer called age and a string called name, basically. Variables help us store and manipulate data in our programs, but before we use them, we need to declare them. So how do we do variable declaration in Java? That's the next thing we need to understand. So let's move on to declaring variables in Java. So declaring variables in Java is quite simple. So let's break down a variable into three important aspects of variable declaration. As you can see on the screen, we have a white box which has data type variable name equals to value. That is a generalized variable. That's a generalized structure of variable declaration in Java. So before declaration, we write the data type, which defines what kind of data the variable will store, whether it's an int, double, char, or a string. Then we have the variable name. That's the name that you assign the variable, whether it's age, score, name, what have you. That's completely up to you. But there are certain conventions that you always need to follow when you're doing variable name declarations. But generally speaking, it can be, in technical terms, it can be anything you want it to be. And then that's the value, the actual data that you're trying to store under that variable name. So there's certain examples of variable declarations in Java that I would like to go over first. And here are four examples of it. We have an int called age, which is an integer variable storing age. Then we have a string called name, which is a string variable storing a name. Then we have double price, which basically is a double variable storing price. And then we have a boolean is Java fun, which is a boolean variable storing true and false values, basically. Notice how each variable has a specific data type. Java is statically typed language, meaning we must specify the type when we are declaring a variable. So next thing we need to understand, are there certain conventions or rules when you're naming variables, as I mentioned earlier. So we need to remember that when you're naming variables, we need to remember that it must begin with a letter, underscore, or a dollar sign. It cannot begin with anything else. These are generalized. So when we talk about naming conventions, these are certain rules that apply to programmers that are working in professional capacity. And there's certain more even higher level rules that are just used when working with variables in a certain language, or with certain aspects of a certain language. So these variable naming rules are rules that you must follow if you want to code in any capacity to in a team environment when you're writing variable names, basically. So they must always begin with a letter, underscore, or a dollar sign. It cannot begin with anything else. As we can see on rule number 2, it says you cannot begin it with a number. Number 3 is we need to be case sensitive. Age and age are different. So variables are very, very case sensitive. With almost everything in a programming language, case sensitivity comes part and parcel. So you always need to remember that having a single capitalized letter in a word changes the word completely. Age with a capital A and age with no caps is pretty much completely different variable names in Java's or the computer's eyes, basically. Rule number 4 is that you cannot use Java keywords like int or class as names of variables, because those are your type declarations that come before them. You cannot use them as names. Similarly, you cannot use reserved keywords as names as well. That's a certain extension to generalized Java keywords like type declaration. And number 5 is we should always be meaningful. Basically, you need to have a name that you can understand exactly what type of data is stored into it. So if you store a name of an individual in a variable, and if you call that variable basically xyz, you won't be able to remember exactly what is in that data variable if you come back to it a couple of weeks later. So always have names in variables which can easily be identified or understood when you're looking at it after some time. Some examples of variable names that we can see here, which can also tell you which names not to use. So we have the first name we have int declaration my age. Basically, if I read this, I understand that it's about the my age is being my age is actually being stored in that variable, right? The data of the value of my age. Then we have number 2, which is underscore score, basically, which is basically correct way conventionally to use variables, because we can start with underscore, dollar sign, or a letter. We can never start by numbers. So that's the correct naming convention used here. Then we have 2 players. That's the wrong naming convention. No variable can start with numbers. You can declare them, but they cannot start with a number because it's the wrong naming convention. And int class is not even going to be accepted by Java compilers, because that is a reserved word and that would raise an error in Java. Then we have variable types in Java, basically. So in Java, variables can be categorized into 3 main types: local variables, instance variables, and static variables. And understanding those 3 variable types is going to be essential if you want to get better at dealing with variables in Java. So local variables are declared inside a method and can only be used within that method. So basically it can be similar to a scope, right? A local scope is that if a variable is declared in a function, it can only be used on that area function. Or if you become more generalized, so with a variable that is basically declared in a specific segment or specific space in Java, cannot be used in another space in Java, basically. Similarly, instance variables are declared inside a class but outside a method and belong to an instance of that class, basically. So here we have another aspect to this. We have an instance which is a method, which is a method inside a class. So basically instance variables can only be used in that method, but declared inside a class but outside a method and belong to that instance of that class. So basically they can only be used inside the class but not the method itself. And static variables are declared with the word static keyword and shared across all instances of the class, basically. So they can be used almost anywhere. Next thing that we need to focus on is basically the variable types in Java, and what understanding these types, basically how that helps us. So this is an example of variable types here that you can see. We have in a class example here where we have int instance var, which is an instance variable. We have the static int static var, which is a static variable, and a local variable which is within the void method, basically. So that is how you see and a better understanding of these variables through this example we can derive. Basically, you see those curly braces. Those curly braces basically tell us the scope of a variable. So within these curly braces, the instance var can be used, right, which includes the void method below. Static variable can be used everywhere as well, so you can see that it's within that scope. But remember, with static variables, it can be used pretty much universally everywhere. But with instance var, it can be used within those curly braces, right? Similarly, the local var is within the curly braces of the method, so it can only be used within the curly braces of the method, but it cannot be used within the curly braces of the class. That's a better way to understand exactly how variable types and their scopes work in Java, basically. So let's move on to the next thing, which is which is rather not the next thing, but a quick roundup quiz on this problem, basically. So we have 3 values here, right? Let's test your knowledge. Spot the errors in the following code that you can see on the screen. You can pause the video right now and try to identify these errors. So I think at this point, I'm hopeful that you've paused the screen, at least deliberated. Even if you haven't answered it, at least you've read through these questions and thought through what potentially could be the answer, right? Based on that, let's see what were the issues here, right? So basically, here's what was wrong with those 2 values. The variable name one number starts with a number. That is an incorrect way to start a variable name, and that runs opposite to the naming conventions that we discussed. And class is a reserved keyword that cannot be used in a variable name. If you have picked up these two issues, then you have done a great job, and you got the right answer to this quiz. So let's do a quick recap of what we learned. We learned variables store data in Java. We learned that declaration follows the data true variable equals to value structure that we showed right at the beginning. We understood that we need to follow Java's naming rules, and we look into different types of variables that exist in Java, local, instance, and various static, and saw how their scoping works based on the curly braces. And that's it basically for this lesson and this part of the first part of the chapter 2 video. If you found this video helpful, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Smart Architectural Programming for more Java tutorials. And if you're following along for the book, good job. You've started the next chapter out of 2 to 17 chapters, which are going to lead you towards the roadmap towards Java mastery. With that, we're going to wrap this video up, and we will see you in our next video. Thank you.